Hello, everybody, and welcome to this NYWF 2022 digital event, Mining Disability. I am so excited to be joining you here now with Rani Tesiram and Tiana Sixsmith, and we're going to be chatting all things disability and writing. But before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm broadcasting to you from, Wurundjeri land, and pay my respects to elders past and present, to Aboriginal people on the land that I'm on, and any land that this broadcast may reach. So thanks to everyone for watching, and I'm going to kick off with a question, but it's a really easy one, I think. So if you would like to introduce yourselves, who would like to go first? Maybe Rani. I'm just going to pick you.
Okay, I'll go first. I don't know what you mean by the easiest question. This is the hardest question.
As I said that, I was like, that is just a lie.
Kicking it off with a lie. All right, cool.
Yep.
No, hi, I'm Rani. I'm a Wiradjuri Indian person, writer, poet, creator, living on the Turrbal and Jadara lands in Meanjin, but I would also like to pay my respects to the Kondamuka and Yugambeh people of the Bayside and surrounding areas. I'm kind of on that intersection of everyone, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to any of the elders past and present on the lands that this is reaching. Yeah, writer mostly, creator, yes, doing all the things.
Hi everyone, I'm Tiana Sixsmith. I am joining you from Wurundjeri country, and I'd also like to acknowledge the elders past and present, and also any Aboriginal people that are listening in today as well, and I pay respects to them. Oh my gosh, yeah, all I'm doing is trying to think about how I talk about myself. It is absolutely the hardest question. I guess I'm mostly a public servant. I work in government policy, and then I'm kind of a writer. I say kinda, but most of that's just my self-imposed doubt. I like to write, I like to create things, and I really like going to the theatre and doing all those sorts of fun stuff. And I like to read, as I'm sure lots of people who are tuning in like to do as well. And that's me, and that's as much as I'll say before I have a panic.
Excellent. Great. Yeah, sorry about the lie, because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? I'm Olivia Muscat. I'm a writer. I'm a critic. I'm a sometimes performer. I'm also definitely a reader, and a theatre goer. And yeah, I work as an activist in the sort of disability art space as well, and write a lot of memoir, write a lot of criticism, and love to write fiction and make stuff up all the time as well. So that's all I'll say. So our first actual question, to kick off our discussion this evening: how do you navigate being a creator in an industry built by and for non-disabled people? So anyone want to kick that off, or do you want me to choose?
Yeah. I mean, I'll go for it.
Yeah, please go.
It's really interesting because I didn't mention in my introduction that a lot of what I do is like podcasting and radio. And the irony in that is, being a deaf podcaster and radio host, is that, like, half the time I can't really hear what I'm doing. But it's really interesting sort of how we navigate. Like obviously we decided to record this panel in Zoom because of the live captions, because not all like programs that you use will have live captions. So it's very much that like case of advocating for what you need and what you want to make it a little bit easier. But also, that being said, there are like times where with my teammates at like my work, I like they just never put the captions on in Zoom, sort of thing, and it like becomes kind of difficult to like really focus. I end up spending so much more time focusing on trying to figure out what people are saying than actually like being present in what is going on.
Or anything.
Yeah. So that's always interesting. And then I think slowly over time, I got a little bit, as I get more comfortable, I get a little bit more vocal. So like that's part of what I'm doing, like in the radio space, is trying to make like the radio, our community radio, more accessible for disabled people. Yeah.
I mean, there are so many, like I used to think, oh, I want to write and I'm blind. Like what are the barriers? And it's like, oh, there are so many barriers when you actually have a look at it and actually break it down. Like it's something as simple as, for me, sometimes like a submission form or submission requirements might just be really inaccessible for me, whether it's inaccessible in the sense that I literally cannot use a screen reader to access whatever form they want me to fill out, or it's because they want me to have it in 12-point font spacing, whatever, blah. I don't even understand. Like I understand what those words mean, obviously, and I can change the settings, but like I don't know if it's worked. And navigating that, it's been something that's been really, I mean, at first it was really difficult because I was just like, I can't do that and I don't want to ask for help. Like that's also my issue, but I should be able to do something entirely independently if that's how I want to do it. And that's kind of how I view it now. And it's like in the language they use around, you must, and I'm like, okay, sure.
I guess.
I guess so, but I can't. So I won't talk to anyone about it. So I think it's become a real exercise in, like you said, Rani, like speaking up for yourself, which sounds so like grade 4, but unfortunately it's like
not.
It's not, and it's what you have to do. And like finding, and I suppose and then one of those barriers is like sometimes you can't even find a person to contact to say, hey, this is why this doesn't work for me. You will be making an exception, like or change it. And I think that's how I even started getting into the sort of activism around like disability arts, how I even got into that space, because like this needs to shift. And I think that's how I navigate it, just by working towards change. I hope that's what I'm doing.
I really agree with that, because I feel like the biggest thing for me, and the biggest thing that I notice when I'm trying to navigate being in this kind of space, is that you like having like an autoimmune condition means that I have like an invisible disability, and so it isn't noticeable. And it also, because my needs kind of fluctuate, it means that sometimes I have so many spoons, and I'm like I've got so many spoons that my drawers are overflowing, and then other weeks I've got absolutely nothing, minus spoons, honestly. And so I feel like when it comes to me for navigating that space, so much of it was learning to be able to advocate for myself and recognize that it is okay to kind of say that you need particular things, that you might not be able to do a particular thing later on, when maybe you said that you could do it to begin with, because it like for me that was my kind of my fluctuating needs, is that actually sometimes I just wouldn't be able to do things. But you don't want to be seen as being flaky or being unreliable. And I think that was so hard, because I was like, I kept trying to fit into a particular world that actually wasn't made for that, and it would view me as being that type of person. So I guess that was the biggest barrier for me to learn.
And learning to like not forgive is the wrong word, because there's like nothing to forgive, but like allow yourself that as well. Like my disability is not invisible, but it is dynamic. So like some days it's like, cool, I'm on top of this, no worries, I can do it. And then I get worried about what I tell people my access needs are, in case then later I need more or less. Like it's just learning, and I still don't think I've fully figured that out, but I'm trying to like allow myself that flexibility.
I think it's the hardest thing, because like on top of being deaf, I have like autoimmune conditions and like a muscle condition, like a weakness in my muscles that it fluctuates. Like 3 months ago I only had like 50% of my lung function because my muscles were so weak, but then like 2 weeks ago my lung function was back to normal, sort of thing. And it really is about learning how to listen to your body and your limits, and then learning to not be afraid to be like, oh, I can do that, or no, I can't do that at the moment. And nobody like has the right to know why. So you don't have to explain yourself. But for a while I felt like I had to explain like every nuance to it. And then eventually I was just like, no, like
Yeah.
I can do it, I can't do it. We'll see.
That's it.
sort
Just
of thing.
accept what I say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, this next question kind of a very different question, but where do you draw the line between creating from your own lived experience and giving too much of yourself?
Yeah, I got coffee today with a friend of mine, and we spoke about this a lot because we would both call ourselves like disabled creatives, but for the most part, we don't always, we won't always write about disability. We write about quite varied things, and we both feel like we're quite dynamic. But we can feel a little bit hard because we're like, we don't particularly want to be siloed into only being able to talk about disability stuff. And I think that when we kind of recognize that when we kind of opened ourselves up and let our like things about our personal lives out into the world, people kind of were like, oh cool, that's what they do. And then we noticed that we were more likely to get work if we were talking about our disability versus just doing normal things. And it was so hard because we were like, where do we draw the line between doing too much when that's what someone is willing to pay you to do? So I think that was really, really weird and hard to navigate. And
sometimes I feel like I'm exploiting it. And then and sometimes like I'm not worthy of being someone to like actually talk on that behalf. So I feel like I can only tell my story and that it would be inauthentic to change things, but then I don't want to give all of that up. So I don't mind sharing my story in like memoir, but it's the question of like how much of that can I put into my fiction writing? And then also like, because I get it a lot as like someone who is considered, like I call myself the diversity hire because I'm disabled, I'm genderqueer, I'm indigenous, I'm like those sorts of things. And it's just kind of like, well, I don't want to be like, yeah, it's own voices, but I don't want to only write those things, especially as somebody who didn't get to have a lot of those sort of identity things until later in life. Like, yeah, I've always had the muscle condition, or I've always had, not always had, but for most of my life had hearing loss. But it's just kind of like this question of like, I feel like it is inauthentic sometimes to tell a story because I feel like what is expected of me is not the story that I would be telling. And that to be like that idea of somebody who is like has always had this disability, and then I can't write that, or like someone who grew up on country in community, like I can't write that. Those sorts of things. And it is really hard to sort of be like, if I'm writing memoir, if I'm writing creative nonfiction, like that's fine. I can tell my story and I can cut and choose as much as I want. But in the fiction, sometimes I don't want to write specifically indigenous characters or disabled characters because sometimes it does just feel wrong.
It's so like validating and nice to hear you both talk about that because it's something I sit there and I think about it for ages and ages because like I not grew up, but even in my early 20s, I was like, no, I'm not going to write about disability because no one wants to hear about it anyway, because we'll get onto this later, but like representation matters and there was none. So I was like, no one wants disabled stories. It doesn't matter. And then I kind of found this rhythm with it and I got really quite comfortable with writing from my own, disabled experience. And then it became this thing where like, that's the thing I like is seemingly always expected of me. And I mean, having, like total vision loss, like it does color everything I write, just by virtue of who I am and my experience, it like it's going to color everything. And that's fine. I'm completely comfortable with that. But just being always having to write about that, I'm like, I actually have other things that I like talking about too.
You're like, I actually want to do something different. Like a lot of the work that I do is indigenous space, like research, indigenous research. All of my degrees are in creative writing. And I'm like, this is not like, That's
this
not
is
the
not what I
box.
thought I would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and it's a thing of, I don't want to never write about disability, because
Yeah.
I think it's extremely important and love doing it genuinely. But I get that feeling of sometimes, like, maybe I am exploiting it, because I'm like, oh, but if I write like this with a disability lens, it's more likely to get picked up, and I'm more likely to get work, and I'm more likely to get paid.
Yeah.
So it's such a weird balancing act, and I haven't figured it out. And I'm glad it doesn't seem like either of you.
I don't think anybody has.
No, I don't think they have.
I don't think that anybody has. And I also think that we're still in a part of the industry where it's very much tokenistic. So though, like, you'll get work based on the fact that they just want a disability story, and you've written the specific type of gentle disability story that they want to publish, which isn't the story that is like necessarily accurate to your experience as a person.
Like, and I'm writing a middle grade fiction book at the moment, so like for 8 to 12-year-olds, and love it. And I'm writing, and I'll probably come back to this with the questions we have later on, but writing the book I needed when I was 10 or 9. Anyway, and I'm trying, like, it's from the perspective of 2 blind characters, really different experiences, blah blah blah. That's not important. It's now I'm at this stage where I'm like, I don't want it to be an issues book. I don't want it to be a disability book. But also, I do need to explain some stuff and make it overt and clear that this is how a blind person experiences the world. So it's like got me all tied up in knots. I'm like, what do I do here? Because I do not want to be the issues book. I want to be the fun book about friendship. Just happens to have 2 blind girls in it. Like, it's so hard.
It's writing that book where it's a book about this storyline, and the characters just so happen to have disability, whatever disability it is. And it's not like, it's not a book all about it's not a book all about the disability. This isn't how you learn about the disability or whatever. But then the other thing, I was going to say, the other thing with like YA fiction or like middle grade fiction is that you'll sometimes run into the issue of like, oh, is this really appropriate for like the 8 to 12-year-olds to know? And you're like, well, it's what the 8 to 12-year-old went through. So you're like,
it's like, well, this girl seems a bit like partially depressed because she's lost her sight. And I'm like, well,
that's what happens.
That's what happens.
I think that is because I recently wrote a piece about how in Euphoria, Barbie Ferrer is obviously leaving, and I wrote the piece about how, like, well, there goes the only like complex fat character the TV was willing to put forward. And there was all these storylines about how they were going to, do the whole thing where they gave her like an eating disorder storyline and all these other storylines that, and she was going to go through all these big, body confidence related things. And it was really frustrating because I was like, he was this really complex character. There was like a lot of like focusing on her identity and her like sexual exploration and all these sorts of things that I don't think we often, like, we don't have characters like that. And then they were like, no, actually, let's just turn her into the same typical fat character that we like to write all the time because that's going to win us an Emmy. And
right. It's like, no.
I know you're doing so well, and then suddenly you were like, wait, no, we need an award. Like, we need the stereotypical story.
We need to make this into a teaching, learning, look at us, how complex we are moment, instead of a look at this character that's just living their life and happens to be disabled or fat or whatever. It's like, seriously?
I know, I was thinking, I was like, I feel like my ideal world or like ideal like media creative situation is where particularly I guess in TV, because it's just a part I'm interested in, is like seeing like TV shows where there's all these like various diverse characters, but they weren't written that way. Like, you actually just hired people, hiring people like for their talent, not for the sake of picking what their storyline's going to be like. And
like shaping a very issuesy storyline around them. I noticed this kind of the other day. I was kind of shouting about it on the internet that I watched the Heartbreak High reboot, and
Oh yeah.
was
I want to watch
so it was I loved it genuinely. And I thought it was so fantastic that they had you know, an autistic person playing this autistic character who was just doing her thing, and like she's got a crush on this girl and they go on a date. And I reckon there's like 2 episodes out of 8 where her being autistic comes up as like a I'm autistic, so blah 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 kind of little explanation. But it felt very natural and great, and I was like, this is fantastic. But where are all the other disabled kids?
Yeah.
Like, when do we get to the point where there's an autistic kid and a deaf kid and a kid with chronic illness and a kid with mental illness? They all exist in the same, like, I'm thinking specifically like classroom based stuff, because that's what I'm watching. Like, they all exist in the same classrooms, in the same workplaces, in the same friendship groups. And you don't have to be like, oh, look at all the disabled kids. It's like, oh, this kid, you know, is, I'm just going to use my own disability, is blind, and it's still like also bisexual or asexual or queer or linguistically diverse or something. Like, it's so, when do we get past this point? I've just ranted, but like,
no, but it's so valid.
In my head for like a week, so
I think it goes back to that whole like tokenistic thing. We're very much in the media, we're very much on an autistic kick at the moment. So like we had a lot of media that has autistic characters, like Atypical and Heartbreak High, and there are others. I don't know, I've just forgotten all of them.
This one, what's
yeah.
called? Yeah.
And we were all like, that was very much the thing for a while, and it still sort of is. And like, I think that it's just sort of like latched onto that because that's the thing that's starting to become a little bit more palatable to everybody else. Because it, you know, we're becoming a little bit more in tune to what autism looks like, and the fact that it isn't just that what we thought it was when maybe we were younger, and you thought that it could only be in boys, or like
and had to present a certain way, or
but then you have like shows like Home and Away that has had like deaf characters on it for however long, has had Auslan in it. But also, you know, I actually don't think I've seen too many blind characters in things that I
hate making the statement, because like I have not watched every TV show that exists. But I'm like, I haven't seen one that I was like, that is loving that representation. Thank you very much.
Or I've only ever seen it as like oh, they've lost their sight, how tragic. It's been like a plot point, not a natural point of the person.
And even then, we're still struggling to do disabled joy, I think. In any context. Like, I was just, as I was doing my Heartbreak High pondering, I was thinking about sex education and how they had the wheelchair user, but he still ended up kind of being the bad guy and alone. And I was like, I get you're trying to make him complex, and it was working for a while, but now it's just like, oh, he's just kind of evil and sad and alone and has no friends. That wasn't as cool and progressive as maybe
as the rest of the show could have been. It gets that way.
I feel that even with the absence of chronically ill characters, because with a chronic illness, you don't, again, it's not always super visible, and like, how are you gonna spell that out in a 30-minute TV show if it's not visible? Like, oh, that's actually too much script writing and like setting development for us. Let's just go to a disabled character we can see.
And then you don't want to get into that, like, that classic show don't tell thing. And I find a lot of disability space, like I was talking about with my book, it's still like in the tell phase. Like, so how do you get around that with chronic illness and invisible disability? Like, surely if we're doing good writing, there's got to be ways of doing that.
Oh, absolutely.
We really, our next two questions were
About,
why is
media?
disability representation in media important to you, and how do you think the representation of disability in the media has shaped your relationship with the media today?
Yeah.
And I think we've been answering those.
Yeah.
But is there anything specific that either of you wanted to say?
I wanted to bring up that I was watching She's All That not too long ago, because they did the like remake of it where they like gender swapped it.
Yeah.
So I was watching the original one, and I was just looking at it, and I noticed that the little brother is wearing a hearing aid. And I remember I like almost jumped off the couch because I was like, oh my gosh. And I looked it up. I was like, oh, is he actually deaf? No, the actor wasn't.
Okay,
It's also a movie from the 90s. And he didn't know that the character was meant to be deaf. It was just like they just put a hearing aid on him, and then they just went about it. And so this character, like, he gets teased for his hearing aids, but it never becomes like a point of like his character storyline, and they don't necessarily treat him any differently, which I was of two minds about, because I was like, one, it's not accurate, but two, it's also incredibly accurate. Because it was like, you know, the film opens with with her banging on his door to wake him up, sort of thing. And I'm like, he's got a pretty like heavy duty hearing aid on. Like, do you see that? And it's like, I don't think he's going to hear you banging on his door, yelling at him to get up if he's using such a powerful device. But okay, cool. So it seemed very much like an afterthought, like, oh, let's just make this character deaf, and then, but not actually change anything about the script. And he doesn't say too much ever. There's just really that point of like, maybe it made more sense for him to be bullied if he was different, because there is a scene in the film where the guy stands up for the kid because he's being bullied in the cafeteria, sort of thing. But I do remember that my immediate reaction to seeing a character that had like my disability was to jump off the couch in excitement and be like, oh my god, yay. But like past that, I don't know, like I get that as well with like race things. So seeing Never Have I Ever, I was like, oh, an Indian American, because I grew up in America and I'm Indian as well. So it was just kind of like, oh, that's my like that third culture thing just thrown in there. And that felt a lot more accurate, but I feel like sometimes that's a little easier to harness. Not always though.
Yeah. Bringing up Never Have I Ever, I got so excited when in the opening shots she was in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, are we getting a disabled character? Like, is this? And then, oh no, she can walk, and it's a miracle. Okay.
No.
Yeah.
That was like such a disappointing moment.
It wasn't even like her trying to work through the psychosomatic thing either. It was just, she can't walk, she can walk.
Now she
sort
can.
of thing.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, I would have liked to have seen that like mental illness arc of her trying to work through that trauma that caused her to lose her ability to walk, and then like work through it and start to be able to walk again, because that is a thing that happens. But yeah, I remember that I had the same reaction. Yeah,
I feel like it's one of those things where, again, like, creators are always like, oh, we don't have enough time in, you know, this 30-minute episode, let's just kind of skip through all the traumatic, hard, complex stuff to write, and let's do the pretty easy.
Yeah, it's like, or you could make it a multi-episode arc, but that's fine.
Yeah, whatever, you've got a whole series to work with, but yeah, sure. Kind of ties into our next question, which was a lot of media focuses on disability from birth. How do we start to normalize acquired disability without turning it into narratives of toxic positivity? Which
I feel like I could talk about this for absolutely forever, because I think that I only started to, I guess, to identify as disabled probably like 2 years ago, I think. I remember just feeling so like, because it was in like a period of time where I think, and TikTok still does it, but platforms like TikTok were like, hey, do you have issues with your gut and your hormones, and is your skin dry? Like, here's 10 tips to fix everything in your life. And because I was in that really vulnerable state of, you know, trying to work out what was going on with my body and why did I feel like this and why could I not get out of bed? Why did I feel so sick? I didn't really understand what was happening, but I would find any possible way to pretend that there wasn't anything wrong with me. I think so, like, coming to the point of going, oh no, actually you have a disability, you know, you're disabled, and that's an okay thing. I feel like I went through the whole arc of like toxically positive, everything's fine, you know. I'm going to follow all these, I don't know, bikini bloggers and just utter crap that you just do when you're trying to work out who you are. And I think finally just getting to the arc of like, oh, I'm disabled, I don't need to be somebody's inspiration, I can just like be sick and that's okay. And you don't need to, like, I can write about it and talk about it, but it doesn't like need to be that thing where I always have to be happy about it and okay. Like, getting to that point was just, it was so hard to, and I don't think I saw that normalization for so long. So I think getting now.
You have to go through that process of like the pit of despair to disabled doesn't define me to you know what, I'm just gonna live my life. It's like, you know, you have to wallow in self-pity, you have to have your pity party, like, especially if you've acquired it, especially if you've grown up being able to do all of these things and then all of a sudden you can't. That's hard. That's so hard. And so many people don't talk about that, because a lot of what happens when you get that diagnosis, or you go through that experience of losing something that you had, because you are, people around you will be like, oh, they'll either come at you with so many people, other people have it worse, or they'll show you all these videos of people with the same or similar disability to you, like kicking ass in whatever it is that they're doing. But what those videos don't show you is every bad day that led up to that, like every single day. Like I was a rock climber, so I've had, you know, my muscle condition technically my whole life, it's genetic or whatever. But it didn't become an issue until I was older. I was a rock climber. I was a competitive rock climber. Did all of these things, was getting really strong. And then one day I got sick and they thought that I had cancer. And then they found an autoimmune disease. And then they found another autoimmune disease. And then they treated those and I still didn't get better. And then they figured it out, or are in the process of figuring it out. And in that process, I lost all of my ability to do those things that I was used to doing. Like getting up sometimes, walking up the stairs. And it was so difficult for me to come to terms with that, especially when people would be like, oh, you're just being lazy, or you're just having a negative mindset about it. And yes, there's a part of that is incredibly true, where you can't just sit there and say to yourself, well, I can't do this because I have this X, Y, and Z. Like, you can't let that be your entire life, but you also have to learn how to let yourself have those days. And then the other thing was, like, with my deafness, I'd had it since I was a kid, but I never had any support for it until I was 21. Like, I didn't have a hearing aid until I was an adult, because they just went, oh, it's just fluid, oh, it's just ear infections, oh, it's fine, she'll be fine. Because it was unilateral and it was like in the mild moderate area. And that's where that issue of, like, you know, we assign those labels to things and we think, oh, well, it's not severe, so you can get on with your life. And we kind of expect that disability has to be like almost this all or nothing thing. Like, if you don't have the worst form of it, then it's not that bad. You need to like shut up and get on with your life.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I talk, like I didn't mention it in this thing chat. Like, I talk a lot about disabled joy and positive disabled stories, and I think they are important and need to be told. But there's like, I think another thing I'm struggling with is, while writing, is like, but it is hard, you know. You do get really down about all the things you can't do anymore. It's not this automatic, you have to be proud to be disabled right away. And it's something I struggle with in my writing and in my teaching as well, because I work with a lot of kids who have newly lost their sight or are losing their sight, and they are not happy about it. And it's like, you know what? They don't have to be happy about it. It fucking sucks. Like, you know, we're
Yeah.
told, like, you get this narrative that, and this is like, you know, within the disability community, it's like, oh, but it's not lost. You know what? We can eventually look at it that way, and I
Yeah.
can look at it that way now. But at, you know, at the time while you're going through it, it's not an easy thing to do. And so it's a real balance. And I think in real life, like, the best thing I can do for, like, my students is, like, be a role model
Yeah.
of, like, hey, I'm living life, it's fun, it's cool. But I also, you know, I get where you're coming from, it's shit.
Yeah.
And you know, my thing was, like, drawing comics. That was what I loved to do and what I wanted to do, and then I couldn't do that anymore.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, you can still draw, like, you can still draw, you can still pick up a pen. I'm like, yes, I can still pick up a pen. I can't see where I'm putting that pen or see the end result. So no, you can be as positive as you want about it, but actually, no, I can't do it. Like, I just can't.
It's like, yeah, be positive, but also be practical. Like, I'm a musician,
like,
and I've been a musician since I lost my hearing. So I don't know any better as a musician, but there are practically certain things that I cannot do as a musician the same way other musicians can do. Like, I don't tune my instrument by ear, because why would I do that when the ear that is not, like, doesn't have the issue is the one next to the instrument, and can't hear the other instrument that I'm meant to be tuning to. It's that, I can be positive, like, I still play music, I still make music, but practically I can't do it to the same extent as other musicians can.
And I think oh, sorry, Tiana.
No, you're right. I was just gonna say, I feel like it comes back to that same thing where, like, particularly when we're, like, writing characters and watching characters on TV or whatever it might be, when they're disabled, people don't like it if they don't have that nice arc, and it's like, oh, it's really tough, and then it's beautiful and wonderful and everything's fine. And, like, yes, awesome, like, seeing that disabled joy at the end is great, but, like, if that joy doesn't happen, people, like, you just don't see it. And I think it's really hard to recognize that sometimes some of that hardship is, it just happens and it's okay, and you're not going to get
like we acknowledge that, you know, disabilities can fluctuate and access needs can fluctuate. Our attitudes towards our own disabilities can fluctuate, and that should be way more okay.
It really should be. And also, that fluctuation, I think, sometimes hits a lot harder than the initial loss, because you do all of this work to be so positive about it, and then one day it just hits you and you can't deal with it, and you don't get to change it, so it just hits you so much harder.
It's like any kind of grief, you know.
Absolutely. It doesn't get easier, you just get better at dealing with it. The stints between the overwhelming waves of grief are longer.
And, like, you do find new things and the positives and the relationships and the great stuff that can come with it. But that doesn't take away the things that aren't there anymore.
And you get to explore all the really cool assistive technology. Like that, like, you know, like, these headphones that I'm using were made specifically for deaf people, and they have, like, with the app on the phone, they can be set to your specific hearing loss, and so then it's like mixing the frequencies to that so that you can hear better. And there was, like, I listened to my favorite album for the first time with these headphones on, and I was like, like, I don't know, it's like, there's a video of me sort of sitting on the floor just, like, losing my mind because I'm hearing these things for the first time. And, like, it's like, you know, that's the video that you see pop up on Facebook of, like, this person hears for the first time, or, like, colorblind person sees color for the first time, and it's like, that's that video, but it like, it's a really overwhelming thing. Like, you see it as a super positive thing, and I'm just like, oh my god, my entire world has just changed.
And it's such a moment for you. Like, that's your moment. Like, it doesn't need to be, I'm not saying yours specifically was, but those moments don't need to be shared with the rest of the world. And I think that's the difference I think we get mixed up sometimes, you know, when we see those videos and whatever, and people go, oh, you know, inspiration porn, which like it is, but like it doesn't mean the moment was bad. That
Yeah.
that was that person's moment. The issue is the sharing it and going all goo goo gaga over it when
Yeah.
it's just something that a lot of people have done, but it doesn't take away from you know, the actual person who's experiencing it and what a overwhelming or big or positive moment that was
There
for
are
them.
a lot of those types of videos for like, oh,
Mm.
baby hears mom's voice for the first time sort of thing. And you know, I follow a lot of deaf creators, but I follow a lot of parents of deaf children.
Mhm.
And a lot of them, when they're sharing those videos, they're sharing them purely to share the journey, purely to show the journey. Like, this is their first hearing aid, this is the first time they're hearing me, this is the CI activation day. And it's honestly like, that is fine, and I don't want to deter families from sharing their journey. It's everybody else that turns it into, oh my god, how cute is this? And it's like, yes, it's cute, but you also haven't acknowledged that, first of all, some of those babies have gone through, you know, a surgery, or parents have gone through something really traumatic, that they were not prepared for this. And because the process of learning that your baby can't hear, or your baby can't see, or isn't going to be able to access the world the same way every other baby gets to, just for funsies, is like, that can be so hard. The parents have to learn how to make the world more accessible, and they want to share that journey so that other parents can make it easier, so that eventually it's for the benefit of the disabled child. So not all accounts are like that, but you know, the ones that I follow are. But I curate like what I'm taking in, sort of thing. But it's just like, it becomes that process of like, you don't want to not share it, but you also don't want to share it because there's that level of privacy, sort of thing. And it's just really interesting. I don't know. I just, inspiration porn gets me so mad. And some of my friends have like used me as inspiration porn for themselves. And I'm just like, don't. And they've like told me, they've been like, oh, I find it like, you're so inspired. And I'm just like, don't ever tell me that. Don't I appreciate if you see me struggling and you want to encourage me, but I don't want to hear about how, when you're having a bad day, or like you're feeling particularly lazy, that you think of me and how much I'm doing, and and I don't want to be the reason you bully yourself into doing something that you didn't want to do. Like, because don't blame me.
Like, disabled people don't exist for like the gratification of non-disabled people.
Exactly. I'm like, no.
Worse than friends. Oh my god, it's bad enough when people like come up to me on the train and like, well done, you're out and about. I'm like, yep, yeah.
Yes, I have to.
Believe
it or not,
well done.
I still have to. Like, believe it or not, I still have to live my life.
Right.
Even though I have a disability.
Fun
fact.
Yeah, I feel like that's what I thought the first time I ever, I think, disclosed, and I think it's happened on 2 occasions. Like, the first time I ever wrote a piece about disability, and then the first time I ever disclosed it in the workplace, which are 2 like pretty key things. And both times I had so many, particularly like with the piece, just comments of people going, oh, you're so brave, wow,
oh my god,
I'm so glad you're telling your story. And like,
you're doing so well is patronizing. I'm not 5. I'm not learning how to hold a pencil. Also, like, I don't want this random person to sit here on the street. Like, I get so much if I disclose that I'm deaf, because people will try and like, they'll get mad at me for not hearing their bike coming because they're on my right side or something. And I'm just like, well, I can't. First of all, you didn't ring your bell, because I would have heard it on the other side. Second of all, I didn't hear you coming. Like, I'm deaf. Or like on set, if I'm ever acting on set, being like, hey, I'm deaf, I'm not gonna hear you yell action, sort of thing. Just getting the, oh, but you speak so well. And it's just like, I can still hear, because believe it or not, deaf is not completely deaf. It's not all or nothing. Like, and also plenty of deaf people can talk. You know, we're forced to, and I didn't go through this, but like, my brother went through some of it. but like we're forced to go through like speech pathology and learn how to be a part of like able-bodied society, because it's more comfortable for other people for us to be able to speak.
The other day I was out with a friend, we were meeting some new people, whatever. Someone tried to show me a photo on their phone, and my friend was like, oh no, she can't see it. And I think this other person must have moved it closer, and my friend was like, no, she really can't see it. Like, you could put the sun in front of her face and she wouldn't know. And I was like, yeah, no, you can't see your photo on your phone. And they were like, oh my, like oh my God, I thought it was like one eye or something. Like, you can't see anything at all. And their whole attitude towards me just completely shifted. And I was like, okay, cool, I'm gonna walk away. Like, I'm not having this conversation anymore. Yeah, so I think I don't know what question we were answering, but
I don't remember either.
Regardless, so it doesn't matter. Oh yeah, balancing toxic positivity.
Normalizing, and like the toxic positivity is really like, disabled people exist and we are complex human beings like everybody else. We have good days, we have bad days. You need to show it. And also all of that progress, like anytime I make progress or something, or like, you know, I have weeks where I don't wear my hearing aid because I'm like, don't tell my audiologist. No, but it's just like, you know, and then going back to it becomes overwhelming. You have to work that up. All of that progress I make, or with my muscles, can be gone in an instant, and then I have to go back to it. Just because I've made the progress doesn't mean that I get to keep it.
And one of the things that I think that I really struggled with, and it was my dear old therapist who was like, stop doing this, was that I kept saying like, oh, I'm so lucky for XYZ. And so I've been doing, because I work full time, and I've been doing a compressed work week, you know, 6-7 months, and it's the best thing I've ever done. I work a little bit longer each day, but I get like a full day off. And it completely changed my approach to working. But then anytime anybody else that I work with would find out, they would go, oh, you're so lucky, how did you get this? And I'd kind of say to them, I'm like, oh, actually, this is the reason why. And like they're still like, oh, like, oh, that's so lucky that, like, you know, you're being supported in this way, like blah blah blah.
It's an access need, not a perk.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It's a legal requirement. Like, it's like it's a legal requirement.
And I feel like it comes back all to the, like, even something we were talking about earlier, where like on the days where you know, I might not feel as disabled, like it's the same as that, like that sort of imposter syndrome that I have over it is like, it's the same I get when it comes to talking about writing, where like a little part of my head that's like, oh, you haven't done XYZ yet, so are you really a writer? And then it's like, oh, your disability is not that noticeable, are you actually disabled? Like it's that constant kind of like self-doubt that I'm just like, oh, like that's why I kept saying that. I was like, oh, I'm so lucky, like it's fine. And my therapist was like, stop. Stop.
We have imposter syndrome in every aspect of our lives. It's just like I'm not disabled enough, I'm not deaf enough, I'm not sick enough, I'm not a writer because I don't have this many publications through like mainstream publishing. Like, it's just, but no, it doesn't change that I'm a writer. It doesn't change that I am disabled. It doesn't change that, oh my gosh, I cannot hear you, please.
Someone else's experience doesn't change doesn't affect yours.
No,
I think it's something I have to keep telling, it's imposter syndrome. That's plain and simple. And do you think that representation is a way of shifting this in everyone's attitude?
I think so, because for a lot of people it's how they're exposed to it. So if you don't go to a school that has a diverse classroom, and you know, in Australia your chances of that, you know, if you go to a state school in Australia, you're definitely more likely to have a diverse classroom. Like, I went to a private school for high school here because I've only done high school here. And my classrooms were not diverse in that way. But, I have friends who are public school teachers who in one class they will have a blind kid and a deaf kid and a kid with like a learning disability or something like that. And they have to be able to make their classroom accessible for all of those children, which is a hard job.
Oh gosh,
that is a
Oh,
tough
yeah.
task. I think that for a lot of people, that is how they're going to be exposed to someone with a disability. And it's quite possibly the only way they're going to know about it and see it, because they may never meet someone like that in their life. And that's just sort of like, we can't say that you're always going to, but you should be prepared if you do. And if the only exposure you have prior to that is media, then it should be more than the stereotypes.
And I think leading on from that, we had the question of what do you think we can do to create more space for own voices representation? Which is a hard question.
It's a really hard question, because we're trying to do it in so many spaces at once. Like, we're trying to make space for more Indigenous writers, we're trying to make space for more refugee writers, we're trying to make space for more gender diverse writers and all of that. And a lot of the answers that we get are like, well, they make their own thing and then they go for it. And it's like, well, that's kind of a band-aid solution, because the mainstream is still an issue. And like, one thing that I see a lot is opportunities for disabled writers. It'll have like disabled and deaf writers. And I'm like, why am I different? Like, why am I not just in disabled as well?
That's
Yeah, and it's like, but it's just that, also that case of like, okay, well, if I go for that, are you going to ask me a bunch of invasive questions about my disability? Or are you going to turn around and decide that I'm not disabled enough for you to use as your like token disabled writer?
I always wonder this, who's judging who's disabled enough for these things? And it always makes me super uncomfortable. And like, I know that I probably won't have that problem because I'm very visibly disabled to a severe degree. Like, it's really easy to understand. She can't see shit. Cool. But it makes me so uncomfortable. Like, who is the judge of who is disabled enough and what disabilities count and how much they count? It's like, and I feel like we're moving a little bit away from that, but I really stress the little bit. It's so, and applying for anything like that is like, why is this the only opportunity? Why can't we apply with everyone else and be given the same opportunity to succeed?
I see that a lot with like Indigenous things as well, where it's just kind of like, the only winners of this prize have ever been someone that wasn't Indigenous, because we have an Indigenous prize. And it's like, well,
right.
If I'm going for the Indigenous prize, you also expect me to give you a COA, a confirmation of Aboriginality, which a lot of people don't want to get because of the history behind registering your Aboriginality with the government. And also just like, why? Like, what that digs up so much trauma. And it's like, why are the only opportunities identified opportunities? Why aren't you just doing better?
And I feel like it's also like this thing with like art generally, is that art is subjective, but particularly with writing, and like there are people who view writing in such a particular way, and that there is only one type of like good writing and good style of writing, that if you like diverge from that particular style of writing in any way, again, it's so hard to like contribute. And I feel like I read like there was an interview where I think for like the SBS Emerging Writers competition, Alice Pong came out and was like, I don't care how you submit this, what it looks like I want to see your actual voice in this. I don't want you to feel like you have to conform to anything. I feel like it was like one of the first times I actually saw someone going like, don't worry about the grammar, don't worry about the spelling, like, just send me, I want to see your voice in this piece of writing. And I was like, oh, that's really nice.
Just tell me your story.
And I think that also comes back kind of I mean, it comes back to a lot of things we've said, but it makes me think of specifically, you know, again, with this whole panel was mining disability. It comes back to that, like, so if I want to be accepted for this opportunity, do I have to talk about disability all the time? Like, I applied for something earlier this year, and it was the disabled version of a residency. And it was like, this is the special one for disabled riders. And I'm like, cool, but why not just make it clear, make it possible to meet people's access needs so they can access any version of this, not just the special disabled one. And then I got conflicted because I was like, but it was so nice to spend time with other disabled riders and talk about stuff and get to know them and be, you know, encouraged and uplifted and have such a lovely group of disabled creators. So like I'm still in two minds about it, but it's like it was a really lovely experience, but also let's just meet people's access needs all the time. Not in the special disability week. And
I also applied for like a disabled residency, and part of it was like the interesting aspect of the mentors being able to be there and talk specifically to how you can use your NDIS funding for your career as a writer, or like those sorts of things. I thought that was really cool, and having that space, amazing. That should, like, I feel like we definitely should have that, like how to make sure you can use the supports that you do get to be able to like progress your career.
And I think that's why I'm in two minds about it, because it was this particular thing, it was so good, but then I'm like, but what about the rest of the time? That one
it's
week.
like,
and then all the people involved were writing projects that had to do with disability. And I was like, I wonder how many people applied that just want to write about flowers or fairies or, you know, fucked up zombies or something, that just didn't get the project that wasn't disabled enough.
I wonder if like, I know that we've applied for the same thing once, Olivia, because I didn't get it, but I got a highly commended. And I know for a fact that my manuscript wasn't specifically about disability. And then, like I looked at everybody else, and they were either already like sort of more established writers, or their manuscripts were specifically about disability.
And that's why I feel like I might be, you know, exploiting it a bit, but I'm like, no, this is the project I want to work on, but also that's dodgy as hell.
Like, if you're only going to accept ones that are about disability, it's like, also like if I go for an Indigenous thing, if it's not specifically about country or being Black, they don't want it, because it's not supporting the narrative that they want to push about who I am as a person. And that's always the way. It's always tokenistic. And the only way to not have it be that way is to let people from those backgrounds lead the way. Like, you know, like at the moment there's a big push in the editing industry, in the publishing industry, for Indigenous editors, because we don't have a lot, or just like not white editors, because pretty much every editor you'll encounter under the sun is white. And so it's about, how do we make publishing more culturally diverse? And then it's like, well, you know, also we should have disabled writers, because I'm sick of seeing like one token disabled kid in a book that, like, it's just like, oh yeah, that kid is missing a leg. It's like, oh, okay.
They are.
And
it comes. Oh, sorry.
No, you're right. I was gonna say, like, I feel like I also think about where I feel like we'd see so much more diversity if people felt comfortable to disclose as well. But you're sort of point where, like, it's not that easy to disclose. Like, even if you're neurodivergent, or like we're not yet like at a stage where like everyone's gonna feel super comfortable to just say,
by the way, no, totally. And then you can't tell. And like, I again hate making the statement that like, oh, there was no disabled people in that room, when there might be. They just haven't felt, you know, like they can disclose their disability, or and it always comes back to that, we need more, whoever, you know, we need more disabled people in positions of power. All right, fine, that's true, I agree, it needs to trickle down from the top, But please tell me how are we going to get those disabled people in the positions of power if we seem to always get knocked out at level, level 1?
Or also that narrative of that, like, we should feel so lucky just because we got to that, like,
Get in, yeah.
yeah. It's like, oh, you should be grateful that you're even like close enough to the table to look at it, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have a seat at the table, but you're in the room.
It's there, it's within reach, but you can't actually get at it.
Yeah, and it's like, it's very much that thing where when you are, disabled and you've got this story of, hardship, and there are non-disabled people who are like, oh, awesome, I love this story of hardship. But then the people who are viewing it aren't actually willing to make any actions to reduce that hardship or, make the world more accessible, because that's not what they get the joy out of, right? Like, they get the joy out of listening to this, like,
how difficult
story.
Yeah.
And so then, like, all of these, like, systematic things that are preventing accessibility aren't being fixed, because, like, you don't get that far into the story. You get to the good, juicy, like, tough bit where they come out on top and everything's fine, and then you're like, I don't need to deal with that.
And what about the next person who doesn't have the energy or the support or anything to overcome that hardship? Like, just remove the hardship. Just remove
just get rid of it.
Get rid of
it. Just get rid of it.
I think we just solved everything.
Yeah, we fixed the world. It's good.
Better now. And that might be the best note to end on.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely.
Unless anyone has anything really burning they want to say.
I don't think so. But I do think that, like, in terms of, I mean, I would really love to know how to use my NDIS funding to help my writing career. Not gonna lie, not that I have much NDIS funding, but that's another issue. But like, it's just creating those. Part of it is as a disabled writer, and I hate to have to say this to other disabled writers. Part of it is you really do need to have the grit, motivation, just stubbornness to make your own opportunities. Just keep going. Don't, like, it gets tiring. When you're tired, rest. I 100% get that. Like, I will push myself, and then I'll be like, that's it, I'm done. And then, like, a week later, I'll be back at it. But it's just that making those opportunities for yourself. Okay, cool. Nobody wants to take my book of poetry and publish it. Like, they don't, because it's not their specific version of deafness that they want. It's not their narrative that they want to sell. Cool, whatever. I am in a position to self-publish. I'll self-publish.
People out there that want to see it.
Absolutely.
I think there's a thing of, don't let yourself get into that mindset. It's just the fucking industry. There are actually people out there.
Just because the big, just because the big publishing houses don't want it or aren't taking it, doesn't mean that, the 10-year-olds sitting at home having just been diagnosed with their disability isn't going to find the thing that they need to get through. That isn't going to see that and think that this is absolutely what I needed. This is absolutely what I wanted growing up. Write the stories. Like, that's what like Olivia, you're writing the stories that you needed as a kid. That's what I'm doing as well. Like, writing the stories that I needed. And that I wanted to see, because I could have used it, and if I could have used it, there's surely somebody else that will get something from it.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like the thing, I guess if I could end this with anything, it's that let yourself don't worry about that feeling that you're exploiting your disability, because I'm sure there are plenty of people out there that are also trying to exploit your disability. Use, like, those little things where you feel that guilt and that shame. You're like, oh my gosh, am I only, like, getting this because I'm disabled? Like, do I need to take it? I think bloody take it, because that's another.
Somebody else is going to take it. Yes, so you might as well.
I think take it, because then you can still use that platform, and I think deep down that you're using that platform for good and for that representation, and to try and normalize this. And so
and you can uplift other writers, you can do whatever you want with that. But like that being said, lots of writers, creatives have ways that you can support them, but literally the easiest way is to just, like, follow where they're creating content. So for me, that's my website. and my Instagram, I guess, which is just Rani Tesiram. Kid you not, it's just my name. .com. But yeah, like I'm easy to find. The beauty of having a uncommon name, not unusual, just uncommon name. Yeah. Thanks, Mom and Dad.
Yes, I don't have all that much to promote because I'm just a little old freelancer that actually spends most of my time working in a corporate office, like the slave I am. But I would just say that if you want to support me, you are welcome to contact me and follow me on Instagram and do all those things. And yeah, maybe I'll put something out, and maybe
How do we find you on Instagram?
Yeah.
it's Tiana Sixsmith. Yeah, it's my username. You can follow me.
Like Rani said, biggest way to support writers is to support them with like
Money.
Yeah. If you want to pay my rent, that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine too. But I guess you can find me on Twitter at Olivia _A_Muscat. But if you type in Olivia Muscat, I should be there. That's where I pretty much talk about all the things I'm doing. Or if you want more detailed information, my website is just myname.com. So oliviamuscat.com.
Yeah.
Yeah, so creative. There's a bunch of stuff there about what I do creatively, and also like in terms of sensitivity reading, and which is something we didn't even remotely touch on. But anyway, sensitivity reading and consulting.
You can hire all of us.
Yeah, hire all of us to do your sensitivity reads, people. Or
like write an article for you.
Or write an article. Yeah, support us by hiring us to do stuff that we're really good at doing. And thank you, Rani and Tiana, for being such great conversationalists and having so much good stuff to say. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.